And we do have one more team that is waiting to present, and so love to dive in and discuss this project further. But again, I think we'll have to follow this up with through other means. And please continue to put your comments and questions in the chat box, and we can follow up again afterward. But I would like to give some time to our other quick start project, and this project is entitled Assessing Facilitators and Barriers to Aquaculture and Fish Consumption in Zambia. And this project was a partnership between Mississippi State University, the University of Rhode Island, and World Fish, as well as the University of Zambia. And with that, I will turn it over to the team.
Okay, great. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, good. So actually, this is a very hard act to follow with Rodrigo, because I know all of the aquaculture and like lab fishery peoples are just like, we want to ask them so many questions. And I got actually really caught up in what you guys did. And I am I'm a human study person, just like Laura talked about. So I think it's really generous that you guys are giving us the time for this, and we really appreciate it. So good morning and good afternoon and evening to everyone. And we're going to be presenting our work on the WEFI survey conducted at Zambia's Lake Bangweulu. Our PIs included Lauren Pincus of World Fish and myself, and our co-PIs include Mary Reed Wahidi of Mississippi State University, Pamela Marinda of the University of Zambia, and Elin Terrell of the University of Rhode Island. We also want to give a shout out to our graduate research assistant, Robert Kabila, who is a native Ghanaian, and he's pursuing his PhD in sociology here at Mississippi State University, and he conducted our quantitative data analysis. We want to thank USAID, Feed the Future, and the Innovation Lab for Fish for their generous support of this work. And as many of you know, our goal with Fish4Zambia is to conduct research on how to close the fish consumption and nutrition gaps in Zambia, particularly among the very poor. And it's interesting that we've actually talked a lot about that in these other previous presentations, because as Laura and Rohana also mentioned, like, that's the big question, like, how do we close that gap when people that are fisher families, but they're not actually eating the fish as much as we would like. So this presentation today is based on our quantitative report submitted to USAID and the Fish Innovation Lab, and our manuscript, which is now under review at World Development. Sorry about that. So next slide, please. So we use the Women's Empowerment in Fisheries Index, or the WEFI, which was adapted from the Women's Empowerment in Ag Index, which was developed by USAID and partners. And we collected 397 surveys over 7 days from a random sample of fishery value chain actors who were ages 18 and older and residents of fishing camps and fishing villages at Lake Bangweulu. The WEFI's modules that we're going to go over today are demographics, household level hunger, productive activities and decision-making, including participation in fisheries value chain production activities, and decision-making autonomy around these activities, as well as productive assets and ownership, which included an inventory of productive assets, ownership and control, so who makes decisions about how these productive assets are used, and access to extension, which we know is very important for capacity development. And we also know from the literature that women have much less access in general to extension. So the fifth module is leadership and influence in the community. And this, of course, gets to being able to have control over decisions that affect the entire community. And we did a gender norms attitude assessment, and that looked at participants' perspectives on what were key fishing value chain activities and what were norms around these activities. Next slide, please. So we found significant gender disparities favoring males across many key factors. So men were significantly more likely to report large decision-making input into fishing, into fish processing, into selling and trading fish, and into transporting fish. So these were like the main fishing value chain activities, and they were all very much controlled by men. And men were significantly more likely to report sole ownership of locally produced fishing equipment, externally produced fishing equipment like nets and hooks, and fish processing equipment, including drying mats and knives. And this was, of course, very interesting, even because we know that women are often more involved in fish processing, but men are still owning this equipment that the women are using. And men were also significantly more likely to report sole ownership of fish storage equipment. So men were also significantly more likely to report sole ownership of canoes, and this, of course, is very important for fishing activities, and mobile phones, which, as you all know, we live in an increasingly technology linked world, and everyone needs to have mobile phones when they're trying to make a living now. So we know that that is really important. And men were significantly more likely to have met with an extension agent in the last 12 months. So next slide, please. So we found that women were significantly more likely to have not completed any years of school. So this means that women were likely to not have completed even the first grade, and they were not at all comfortable speaking up in public on decisions affecting their fishing community, on decisions about governing their fishery, and to protest illegal and unsustainable fishing practices. Women were also significantly more likely to report more household level hunger in the past 4 weeks, and this included that there was no food to eat in their dwelling due to a lack of resources to get food, that they or another household member had gone to sleep at night hungry because there was not enough food, and that they or another household member had gone a whole day and night without eating anything because there was not enough food. Next slide, please. So, in sum, we found significant differences across genders for education, for decision making autonomy, for ownership of productive assets, access to extension, community leadership, and household level hunger. And in fact, all of these favored men. So, for example, although 47% of women reported their primary occupation was selling and trading fish, 20% reported little or no decision making input for this activity. Now, this is to me is really, really important. Men also reported higher decision making input than women for every single value chain activity, including activities that they were not their primary occupation, such as selling and trading fish. So it's interesting that although both genders disagreed that men should control fishery assets, income, and decision making, these opinions contradicted the gender disaggregated results that we found. Next slide, please. So, key findings and our lessons learned are that a sizable proportion of men and women disagreed that men should retain control of fishery assets, income, and decision making. And this is what we found from the gender assets norm survey that we did, or the module. So, although these opinions were not reflected in the current distribution of fishing assets, income, and decision making autonomy, they do suggest a more equitable distribution of these resources, and this influence is possible. So our results indicate that the WEFI is a useful quantitative instrument as it is relatively brief and it allows for analysis of socioeconomic context, for household level hunger, for gender norms and attitudes, livelihoods participation, asset ownership, and decision-making autonomies, specifically in small-scale capture fisheries sector. So replicating the WEFI among other small-scale fisheries sectors in other regions and countries will provide important insights on gender equity, commonalities, and differences across sites and contexts. And as you all know, this is what we are doing now with the Fish4Zambia study, which is being conducted at Lake Kariba. So that is it for us. Next slide, please. And we want to thank you all for your time and consideration today, and for our deepest thanks to USAID, to Feed the Future, and to the Conservation Lab for their generous support. And we're only 2 minutes over time right now. So
Wow, thank you, Kathleen. That I know that was a very rapid presentation of a lot of results. So thank you very much.
yeah.
And so I know we're a little bit over, but any questions or comments for Kathleen's team before we wrap up? I know I've mentioned this before, Kathleen and Mary, but you know the difference between men and women in terms of nutritional status. Um, what is? I mean, if you had a gut feeling, is it a perception that the women are just more aware of the household problems, or do you think there is a nutritional difference between the men, women, and children in the households?
I would like to, because I've done so much of the talking, I want to hand this over to Lauren and Mary and Pamela and Elin if they want to jump in here. So my wonderful research partners.
Of course, I'm not the nutritionist, the nutrition expert on the team, so maybe Pamela can add to this if she's on and available. But in general, we do believe that women, I mean, from an anthropological perspective on this, we kind of make this assumption that women are more likely to give up their food so that the men and the children can eat. And so it could be more complicated than that, but that's kind of the on the cuff response to something like this.
Okay, I may add to what Mary has said. Women in Zambia and generally in Africa are responsible for food preparation, and therefore they are aware whether they have enough food in the house or not. And so sometimes the men may not know if there is adequate amount of food because probably they're getting their usual share of food every meal time, while the woman and the children has to share whatever else is left. Yeah, so probably that's why there's a difference in a perception in the hunger household scale between men and women in this study.
Lauren, did you have anything to add? If you're still on, I'm not sure if you're still on. I know it's getting really late for all the people in Malaysia. Yeah, so and this is interesting because what we know through the literature across the board is that women are really tied into this household consumption in a way that men aren't, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, which is where Mary and I are doing most of our work now, and men are going to get the prime food most usually, and also growing boys will usually get the food, and that's just the case really around the world and in most developing countries. So
Okay, thank you.